Queen's duty and her service, her tolerance, her commitment to others.
What happens when the future king is crowned and your children are erased from royal history? It was a single statement, 10 words, spoken with icy precision, that sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace and across the Atlantic. Before we continue, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. If you reject the crown, you forfeit its privileges. Prince William didn't raise his voice when he said it. He didn't need to. The weight behind his words was centuries old. Those standing in the private royal council meeting that morning didn't dare speak. No one interrupted. Everyone knew, instinctively, that a line had just been drawn, not in the sand, but in stone. Meghan Markle, watching from her Montecito estate, allegedly erupted when she heard the decision. Insiders say she smashed a glass, screamed at a senior aide, and launched into a furious tirade accusing the royal family of discrimination, hypocrisy, and betrayal. But what provoked this explosion? What could have possibly reignited the feud so violently after months of apparent quiet? The answer lies in a name, Prince George. Or more specifically, in the title now officially conferred upon him, His Royal Highness, Prince George of Wales, Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order. An honor that confirms him not just as the future king, but as the living embodiment of a monarchy evolving on its own terms. But what made that title's announcement so contentious was not simply who received it, but who didn't. Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor and Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor, the children of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, were passed over. Not due to a clerical error, not due to tradition, but due to deliberate policy. Prince William, in what many insiders now call the most defining move of his leadership since taking on more royal duties, made it clear, only those raised within the monarchy, under its rules, values, and in direct service to it, would be entitled to its privileges. That meant George was in, but Archie and Lilibet? Out. The ramifications were immediate. Meghan allegedly called it a calculated insult. Harry, for his part, remained eerily silent. But the damage had already taken root, and within hours, headlines around the world were screaming of a new war in the House of Windsor, one unlike anything the modern monarchy had faced before. But to understand why this moment hit with such explosive force, we have to go back. Back before the statement, before the titles, before Meghan and Harry ever stepped away from royal duties. Back to the tensions that simmered under the surface for years, and how they evolved into a decision that would now define the future of the monarchy. For years, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have attempted to walk a tightrope. They wanted to separate from the burdens of the crown but retain its advantages. To be free from scrutiny but entitled to prestige. To denounce the monarchy as outdated, while still invoking it for their children's legacy. It was a contradiction the palace tolerated for a while. Until it wasn't. The final straw came not from another Netflix special or an explosive memoir, but from the simple reality that the monarchy needed to evolve. And in Prince William's eyes, that meant pruning its branches. According to senior palace aides, discussions about streamlining the royal family had been ongoing since Queen Elizabeth's final years. She had reportedly favored a more focused, less expansive monarchy centered around those who performed full-time royal duties and lived in the UK. That idea remained dormant for a time, held back out of respect for Harry's departure and the public outcry that followed. But in recent months, that idea became something more, a doctrine. A royal policy that William would eventually present as his own vision for a future-facing monarchy. One where lineage alone was not enough to guarantee access to royal titles, resources, or public funds. The logic was simple. If someone chooses to walk away from the crown, they cannot expect to benefit from its symbols. To outsiders, it may have seemed like a harsh stance. But to those within royal circles, it was long overdue. The title given to George was symbolic, yes, but it was also strategic. George represents the future of the crown, a young heir being raised under its weight and responsibility. A child whose daily life is shaped by protocols, events, tutors, and discipline in preparation for his eventual kingship. Compare that to Archie and Lilibet, children growing up in sunny California, far from Buckingham Palace, in a world of celebrity, private jets, and streaming deals. William's point was clear. How can the monarchy remain credible if it hands out royal privileges to those living entirely outside its framework? But Meghan saw it differently. Sources close to the Sussexes claim that the denial of titles to her children is not just a snub, it's personal. She allegedly told friends that the decision was rooted in long-standing animosity, that William was punishing her for breaking royal tradition and choosing her own path. Others claim she framed it as racially motivated, a continuation of the bias she has long accused the royal institution of harboring. Whether or not those accusations hold water, what cannot be denied is the fury that followed. Meghan, known for her meticulous public image, is said to have lost control behind the scenes. One staffer reportedly overheard her shouting on the phone, "How dare he decide who's royal and who isn't? Who made William king already?" Another insider claims she stormed out of a Zoom call in tears, yelling that Archie deserved better and that the royals had finally shown their true colors. It wasn't just about a title. It was about legitimacy, about legacy, and about what it means to be royal in the 21st century. From the palace's perspective, the decision had to be made. With public support for the monarchy increasingly tied to transparency and merit, William knew that the days of unchecked privilege had to end. In his view, the monarchy must be an institution of service, not symbolism. Those who live it every day earn its respect, and those who walk away, walk alone. It's a position that may very well define his reign in the future. But what happens now? What does this mean for Meghan, for Harry, and for their children, who were once seen as a bridge between the monarchy and modernity? This story is far from over. In the chapters that follow, we will reveal how the decision unfolded behind closed doors, what insiders have confessed about Meghan's reaction, and why royal experts believe this is just the beginning of a much larger battle. You'll learn how Prince George's title became a flashpoint for decades of hidden resentment, how William's resolve signaled a new royal era, and how Meghan's fury may trigger consequences the palace hasn't even begun to anticipate. The fallout isn't just a family feud. It's a generational clash, a war over values, identity, and the future of the most famous monarchy on earth. And if you think this ends with a royal title, think again. This is just the beginning. It began not with a royal parade, nor a grand televised ceremony, but with a short press release. No fanfare, no applause, just a few lines published on the official royal website on a quiet Tuesday morning. The statement read, "His Royal Highness Prince George of Wales has been appointed to the rank of Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order. This appointment, personally approved by His Majesty the King, reflects the importance of Prince George's future responsibilities in public life." The public read it with polite interest. The press picked it up, ran the headlines. Some praised the decision, others speculated on its timing. But inside the walls of Montecito, California, the temperature reportedly dropped like a stone in a still lake. Meghan Markle was stunned. To the casual observer, it was an honorific, a traditional gesture given to the heir of the heir. But to those watching closely, especially those in the know, this was a loaded decision. It wasn't just about elevating George. It was about defining a new royal standard. A line had been drawn, and it left no room for ambiguity. Only weeks earlier, quiet discussions had circulated about the potential for Prince Harry's children to finally be granted their royal titles, something that had remained in limbo since the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. According to long-standing protocol under the 1917 letters patent, grandchildren of the reigning monarch were technically entitled to be called prince and princess. Theoretically, this meant Archie and Lilibet should have received titles the moment King Charles ascended the throne. But the titles never came. Instead, silence. And then, this, an official knighthood bestowed upon George, William's eldest son, while Harry's children remained conspicuously excluded, not just from honors, but from the entire public-facing royal narrative. For Meghan, the meaning was clear. Her children had been left out. Again, palace insiders later revealed that this was no coincidence. The decision had been months in the making and was part of a broader strategic shift being led by Prince William himself. According to one senior royal aide, the plan had been discussed as far back as the Queen's funeral. At that time, a growing consensus among working royals was that the monarchy needed to become leaner, more accountable, and more aligned with public expectations. It wasn't personal, they said. It was structural, practical, inevitable. But Meghan didn't see it that way. She reportedly viewed the move as yet another calculated insult, a direct rejection not only of her children's legitimacy within the royal framework, but of her own standing in the institution she had once briefly been part of. She had given birth to 2 children of royal blood, both legally eligible for titles, and yet they remained outsiders. For Meghan, the message from William was loud and clear. You left, and with that decision, you took your children with you. The door isn't just closed, it's locked. The title for George became a symbol of everything Meghan feared and resented. Here was a boy only a few years older than Archie, raised under the guidance of a family she believed had marginalized her, and yet already being decorated with titles that would follow him through his life. Honors that would ensure his place not just in the family, but in the history of the British crown. Archie, by contrast, remained just Archie. A child with royal blood, but without royal recognition. Meghan's outrage was further inflamed by the fact that the palace hadn't bothered to consult her or Harry before announcing George's elevation. There were no courtesy calls, no advance notice. Nothing. She reportedly learned about it the same way everyone else did, on Twitter. It was a slap in the face. According to a friend close to the Sussexes, Meghan felt as if the monarchy was declaring war. The timing of the announcement, just days before Lilibet's birthday, struck her as intentional. It was like they were twisting the knife, the source said. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a message. And the message was brutal. Titles aren't automatic anymore. They're earned. And Meghan's children had not earned them, not because of who they are, but because of where they are. And more importantly, because of how they were being raised. Outside the royal fold, across an ocean, in a world that stood in direct contrast to the one Prince William and Catherine were building for their own children, the fallout was swift. Royal commentators across the spectrum weighed in. Some praised William for taking a firm stand. Others accused the palace of cruelty. Yet no one could deny the significance of the move. This wasn't just about Prince George. It was about the entire next generation of royals. It was a statement about who would inherit the symbols of monarchy and who would not. And by choosing George, William had made it unmistakably clear, the monarchy belongs to those who uphold it, not those who abandon it. What made the move even more strategic was the nature of the title itself. The Royal Victorian Order is no ordinary distinction. It's not simply given to those born into royalty. It's bestowed by the monarch as a personal gift of gratitude for service to the crown. For Prince George to receive such a title at his age was nearly unprecedented, an intentional signal that he is being groomed not just as a royal figurehead, but as an active steward of royal duty. It was also a shot across the bow of the Sussex narrative. Since stepping back from royal duties, Harry and Meghan have framed themselves as modernizers, figures who left the rigid traditions of royalty behind in order to forge a more progressive, independent path. Their supporters often claim that the monarchy is outdated, ceremonial, and resistant to reform. But William's actions told a different story. Instead of clinging to outdated traditions, he was redefining them. Instead of handing out titles like souvenirs, he was attaching meaning and purpose to them. And in doing so, he was outmaneuvering Meghan at the very game she claimed to be playing. Suddenly, it wasn't Meghan and Harry who were shaping the future of royalty. It was William and George. This power shift didn't happen overnight. It was the product of years of tension, strategic patience, and deliberate messaging. But it was in that moment, when George's title was announced without fanfare, without consultation, and without apology, that the message crystallized. The monarchy wasn't Meghan's to reshape. It was William's to inherit, and he was already making decisions as if the crown were on his head. Perhaps most shocking of all was King Charles's silence. He did not intervene. He did not override William's decision. In fact, palace insiders suggest he fully endorsed it. To many, that confirmed the inevitable. William was not just next in line. He was already steering the ship. And Meghan? She was off the deck entirely. As public interest surged and reporters swarmed for quotes, Harry remained silent. His friends say he was caught between two worlds, bound by love for his brother and loyalty to his wife. But in this case, silence spoke volumes. And it allowed the narrative to harden around him. He had chosen exile. And with that choice came consequences. Meghan, however, was not content with silence. Not this time. She was already preparing her next move. And it wouldn't be subtle. Inside the walls of their Montecito mansion, nestled in the affluent hills of California, Meghan Markle's world was said to have stopped the moment she saw the news alert ping across her screen. She had just returned from a scheduled meeting with Archwell staff when an aide handed her a printed copy of a UK headline, Prince George honored with prestigious royal title, future king solidified. At first, there was silence. Meghan reportedly scanned the article, pausing only to reread the headline. Her lips tightened, eyes fixed on the text. What began as confusion quickly evolved into something far more volatile. According to a former staffer who claimed to have witnessed the moment, Meghan dropped the paper onto the table, stood up slowly, and with clenched fist whispered, "So, it's war now." What followed, insiders say, was a tirade so intense it left her personal assistant in tears and prompted staff to leave the room. The calm, composed, media-savvy figure the public often saw disappeared behind closed doors, replaced by a version of Meghan that those closest to her claim they had seen only a handful of times, furious, deeply emotional, and feeling betrayed. The decision to grant Prince George a knighthood while denying her children royal titles had struck a nerve. But it wasn't just the decision that angered her. It was what it implied, that her children, Archie and Lilibet, were outsiders. Less than. Not worthy. Not royal. She felt blindsided, said one Montecito staff member, speaking under condition of anonymity. It wasn't just a disappointment. It was a slap in the face. Meghan believed the door to royal legitimacy might have been closed when they left the UK, but never locked. This announcement, though, felt like it welded the hinges shut. For hours after the announcement, Meghan reportedly paced through her home in disbelief. She alternated between fury and anguish, recounting past slights and perceived betrayals from the royal family. At one point, she allegedly said, "They're not punishing Harry. They're punishing my children. And they know it." She placed urgent calls to her public relations team. Meetings were held with Archwell executives and legal advisors. There was talk of issuing a statement, though ultimately she was persuaded against it for the time being. But internally, Meghan was already planning her next move. She was convinced this act of public sidelining couldn't go unanswered. Meanwhile, Harry was said to be caught in the emotional crossfire. Reports from those close to the couple suggest Harry tried to calm his wife, asking her to wait before reacting publicly and reminding her that his relationship with William was barely hanging by a thread. But his attempts at diplomacy reportedly backfired. Meghan allegedly accused him of being too passive, of letting his family dictate the rules of engagement while she and their children were treated like afterthoughts. "He still wants their approval," Meghan allegedly snapped at one point. "Even after everything. He still thinks they'll accept us if we're quiet. But they won't. They never have." The bitterness had clearly been festering beneath the surface for some time. Meghan's grievances weren't new, but the George announcement had reopened every old wound. One former palace aide, who now works with a royal charity in London, put it bluntly. Meghan always saw titles as symbols of recognition, not just for her children, but for herself. It was validation. This move from William wasn't just about streamlining the monarchy. It was about sending a message that her path, the American path, was not the royal one. That perspective wasn't far from the truth. William's decision was reportedly the culmination of months of internal debate within the palace. Advisors, legal experts, and even the king himself had weighed in on how the royal institution should handle the next generation. Titles were no longer to be handed out without conditions. The new doctrine would align privilege with participation. And Meghan? She had walked away. The tension wasn't confined to Montecito. In London, word of Meghan's explosive reaction quickly reached back to senior royal staff. Though none commented officially, one insider reportedly quipped, "She's furious? Good. That means we're finally doing something right." The relationship between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family had long been strained. But until now, there had always been a sliver of hope, at least publicly, that reconciliation was possible. That perhaps time and distance could soften old grudges. But Meghan's alleged private behavior painted a different picture. According to a UK journalist with connections to Kensington Palace, Meghan allegedly phoned a close contact in London the day after the George announcement and made several alarming claims. She said Catherine knew about it beforehand, the source revealed. She believes Kate signed off on the timing and did nothing to stop it. That belief reignited one of the most sensitive fractures in the royal saga, Meghan versus Catherine. The dynamic between the two duchesses had always been tense. While public smiles were carefully choreographed during their brief overlapping royal tenure, insiders long maintained that the relationship was polite at best, icy at worst. Meghan's belief that Catherine was complicit in sidelining her children only fueled the fire. She said Kate's health is a shield, the source added. She thinks the palace uses her illness to distract from what's really going on. The accusation was explosive. If true, it would imply that Meghan believed Catherine's recent health challenges were being used as strategic cover to mask controversial decisions. For the public, This theory would sound inflammatory. But in Meghan's private circle, it apparently made sense. Back in Montecito, staff began noticing shifts in Meghan's routine. Normally composed and controlled, she became more unpredictable in her responses. One aide described a meeting where Meghan abruptly left mid-discussion after referencing a storm that's coming and telling her team to start preparing for what's next. What exactly that meant wasn't clear, but it sounded ominous. Rumors began swirling that Meghan was considering another public interview, perhaps with Oprah, perhaps with a new platform altogether. Netflix executives were said to be in quiet talks about a potential documentary follow-up to the original Harry and Meghan series. There were even whispers that Meghan might revisit her legal battle against the British press, linking the title snub to broader issues of bias and institutional mistreatment. Behind closed doors, every conversation became focused on one thing: controlling the narrative. But controlling the narrative wasn't going to be easy. Not this time. Because this wasn't just a PR setback. It was a deep, personal rejection from the heart of the monarchy. William hadn't just made a political decision. He had made a family decision, one that would ripple through generations. Meghan knew it, and it cut deep. Even her closest friends, those fiercely loyal to her, reportedly tried to calm her down in the days following the announcement. But she remained defiant. "They underestimated me," she allegedly said. "They think I'll just accept it, that I'll move on. But I won't." Her language, tone, and determination suggested something more than frustration. It suggested that this moment had become personal in a way no previous slight had. This wasn't just about royal hierarchy or children's titles. This was about legacy, identity, and ultimately about revenge. One longtime royal watcher summed it up best. Meghan feels like the palace just tried to erase her children from royal history, and she's not going to let that happen quietly. What happens next? No one knows for sure. But if Meghan's reaction to the George announcement is any indication, silence is no longer her strategy. The volcano has erupted, and it shows no signs of cooling. In the gilded halls of Kensington Palace, far from the public's prying eyes, a quiet but deliberate revolution has been underway, led not by a king, but by the heir to the throne. Prince William, known to most as a dutiful royal figure following in the footsteps of his father and grandmother, has been redefining the monarchy from the inside. He hasn't needed a formal declaration or a grand media blitz to make it known. His decisions have spoken louder than press conferences ever could. And nowhere has that been clearer than in his approach to royal titles. For centuries, royal status in the United Kingdom was determined by blood. Birthright, lineage, and proximity to the sovereign were often all it took to bestow honorifics, privileges, and prestigious titles. But William, increasingly stepping into the role of a modern monarch in waiting, appears to have drawn a line through the old paradigm. The new standard, quietly but firmly enforced, is simple and seismic. Titles must be earned. This belief didn't emerge overnight. According to senior courtiers and longtime royal advisors, William's views on the distribution of titles have been evolving since his late 20s. Even then, as a young father to Prince George, William expressed concerns about what he called title inflation, the tendency to hand out royal honors as ceremonial entitlements without clear purpose or accountability. William doesn't see being royal as a reward, said one palace insider. He sees it as a job, a life of service. And if you're not doing the job, you don't get the badge. That mentality shaped the recent decision to bestow a knighthood on Prince George, while simultaneously upholding the position that Archie and Lilibet would remain without titles. George, still only a child, is already being raised in the royal tradition, attending events, learning protocol, and understanding the immense weight of his future role. William and Catherine have made it a point to give him as normal a life as possible, but not at the expense of preparation. He is being groomed not as a celebrity, but as a statesman. Archie and Lilibet, on the other hand, are being raised in California, far removed from royal duties, engagements, and expectations. That difference in environment and in participation has become the basis for William's doctrine, and he is not alone. According to documents reviewed by royal journalists, several members of the King's Privy Council have privately supported William's position, arguing that royal titles should not become souvenirs of aristocracy. For those who choose to live independently of the crown, the idea is not to punish those who leave, but to protect the institution from dilution. A monarchy bloated with distant royals, absent from public service yet endowed with prestige, is a recipe for public backlash in the 21st century. For William, it's a matter of credibility. The monarchy, he believes, must evolve to survive, and that means aligning itself with meritocracy, not mere biology. This belief has already shaped several of his major decisions. His refusal to allow Prince Andrew back into frontline duties, despite family pressure. His emphasis on environmental causes, mental health awareness, and youth development, areas where he consistently leads by example. His decision to keep his own family small, tight-knit, and disciplined. All of these choices point to a man building a monarchy for a different era, leaner, more focused, and less tolerant of empty ceremony. When questioned by a close aide about whether Archie and Lilibet might one day receive titles, William reportedly said, "We reward duty, not distance." It was a simple phrase, but a clear distillation of his philosophy. To him, royal privileges cannot be inherited like antique furniture. They must be attached to responsibility. This position has, of course, invited criticism. Detractors argue that William is drawing a distinction that punishes children for their parents' decisions, that Archie and Lilibet, by virtue of birth, should be allowed to carry the dignity of their lineage, even if they are not raised in proximity to the throne. But William's counterargument is rooted in fairness to the institution, to the public, and even to the children themselves. He believes that giving them titles without any corresponding role or obligation is not only hypocritical, but harmful. It places symbolic pressure on children growing up far from royal life and subjects them to a level of scrutiny they neither deserve nor can properly engage with. There's no benefit to them, he reportedly told an advisor. Only risk. Only confusion. The title becomes a cage, not a gift. The idea of a leaner monarchy was not originally William's alone. Queen Elizabeth II had spoken in private circles about reducing the number of titled royals actively receiving public funds and public support. King Charles, too, has long favored a more condensed royal family, focused on those directly serving the crown. But William has taken that concept further. For him, this isn't just about trimming the excess. It's about redefining who gets to wear the badge of royalty in an age when titles are scrutinized rather than celebrated. And the public appears to be listening. In the days following the announcement of Prince George's knighthood, polls conducted in the UK showed that a majority of citizens supported William's decision to reserve titles for active royals. In a time of economic uncertainty and generational shifts in public values, the idea of royalty being tied to service rather than status resonated with many. The perception of Archie and Lilibet as royal by technicality did not garner the kind of public sympathy Meghan may have anticipated. "It's not enough to be born royal anymore," one British columnist wrote. "You have to act royal." And William understands that better than anyone. Behind palace doors, this doctrine has already begun reshaping the way titles are granted and discussed. Younger royals, even those directly in the line of succession, are being asked what kind of role they see for themselves. There's talk of establishing clear public expectations, almost like job descriptions, for those who accept royal honors. The days of ambiguity and quiet entitlement are fading. This shift puts Meghan and Harry in a particularly uncomfortable position. For all their talk of independence, they have continued to invoke their children's royal lineage when convenient. In interviews, press releases, and even legal documents, their titles, or lack thereof, have been points of contention. But William's stance now makes it clear, those titles are not withheld out of spite, but out of principle. What complicates matters further is that William has not made a public spectacle of this doctrine. He has not criticized Harry or Meghan directly. He has not held a press conference or issued a manifesto. He has simply acted. And that, in many ways, has made the message more powerful. The quiet confidence with which he has enforced this vision reflects a man who is not seeking permission to lead, but already doing so. Privately, palace insiders say William knows this position will provoke backlash, especially from across the Atlantic. But he is prepared for that. In fact, some suggest he welcomes it. He's done playing the game of appeasement, one insider said. He's leading now, not just waiting. And in that leadership, a clear message has emerged. The British monarchy will no longer function as a hereditary club of privilege. It will be a family of workers, of servants to the public good. And those who step outside that structure cannot expect to dip back in when it suits them. In practical terms, this means that any future re-evaluation of titles for Archie and Lilibet is unlikely unless their roles change dramatically. That is, unless they return to the UK, participate in public duties, and visibly uphold the institution they were born into. Short of that, the decision stands. No titles, no exceptions. Whether or not the Sussexes accept this reality remains to be seen. But for Prince William, the line has been drawn. Not out of malice, but out of mission. He sees a future where the monarchy survives not through symbolism, but through service. And in that future, titles are no longer hand-me-downs. They're earned. When Meghan Markle and Prince Harry stepped away from their official royal roles in early 2020, they framed their departure as a modern reimagining of what royalty could look like in the 21st century. In their own words, they sought to carve out a progressive new role within the monarchy, an arrangement that would allow them to continue serving the crown while simultaneously building private income streams outside of it. But the monarchy, steeped in centuries of tradition, saw things differently. You're either in or you're out. There is no halfway. Meghan, however, didn't see her departure as a retreat. She saw it as a liberation, a clean slate, an opportunity to blend the glamour and mystique of royalty with the expansive influence of Hollywood and American media. From Montecito, she began to orchestrate a strategy that many believed was poised to redefine the idea of celebrity. Not just an actress, not just a duchess. Meghan aimed to become something far more powerful, America's unofficial queen. The plan was bold, and at first, it worked. Almost immediately after leaving the UK, the Sussexes secured lucrative multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify, launched their nonprofit Archwell Foundation, began producing documentary-style content, and curated a public image centered around philanthropy, wellness, and social justice. They signed with top talent agencies, hired world-class PR firms, and carefully crafted a new narrative, one that painted them as victims of an archaic institution and as visionary leaders of a new era. Meghan, in particular, was central to this vision. Her American roots, her biracial identity, her acting background, and her experience as an outsider within the British monarchy gave her a unique appeal that resonated with American audiences. She wasn't just royal, she was relatable. She had struggled, spoken out, and walked away from a system that many viewed as elitist and outdated. That relatability fueled Meghan's rapid rise in the U.S. cultural landscape. She was featured on magazine covers, honored by women's rights organizations, and interviewed by Oprah Winfrey in what became one of the most-watched TV events of the decade. Her words echoed across social media, talk shows, and think pieces. For a brief time, she and Harry seemed untouchable. But beneath the surface, a dangerous contradiction was forming, one that would eventually undermine everything Meghan was building. Her entire American royal strategy hinged on the very thing she had walked away from, the monarchy. Her brand, her influence, her global status. All of it was rooted in her title as the Duchess of Sussex and her marriage to a British prince. Her decision to leave royal life was framed as an act of independence, but her public image remained heavily reliant on royal symbolism. Even as she criticized the institution, she leaned into it. The Sussex brand wasn't built on Meghan Markle, former actress. It was built on Meghan, the royal rebel. And for many observers, that contradiction became impossible to ignore. American networks, at first enthralled by her story, began asking questions. Why did the couple keep referencing the royal family if they had truly moved on? Why did their Netflix specials and interviews always seem to circle back to Buckingham Palace? And why, if they rejected royal titles for themselves, did they continue to pursue them for their children? This is where the strategy began to falter. Behind closed doors, Meghan was reportedly pushing for Archie and Lilibet to be granted their full royal titles. Prince and Princess, a move that directly contradicted the narrative of detachment from royal life. She had claimed the institution had mistreated her, rejected her, and harmed her mental health. Yet she was allegedly insistent that her children be formally recognized within that same institution. Observers in both the UK and US noted the tension. Meghan had criticized the crown but still wanted to benefit from its trappings. She had distanced herself from royal duties but insisted her children remain in the line of succession. She had branded herself as anti-establishment while holding tightly to the establishment's most powerful symbols. It was to many a strategic miscalculation. Public opinion began to shift. American outlets once sympathetic to Meghan's cause started questioning her motivations. Social media, once filled with hashtags like #WeStandWithMeghan, slowly became divided. On one side were those who still saw her as a trailblazer. On the other, those who now viewed her as opportunistic. The failure to separate her personal brand from royal identity proved costly. Her project struggled to gain traction once the novelty wore off. Spotify quietly ended its partnership with Archie Audio. Netflix canceled planned shows that lacked direct royal content. Even Archetypes, her much-hyped podcast, failed to generate the long-term cultural impact it had promised. Without the royal connection, the Meghan brand lost clarity. Was she a media mogul? A philanthropist? A political activist? The lines blurred. The public lost interest. What's more, her continued pursuit of royal legitimacy for her children appeared increasingly out of sync with her declared values. Meghan had insisted that titles didn't matter, that being true to oneself was more important than protocol, that her children didn't need crowns to define their worth. But behind the scenes, her reported anger over the George title and the omission of Archie and Lilibet told a different story. Sources claim that Meghan viewed the denial of titles as an existential threat to her children's place in history. She reportedly told aides they'll never be seen as equals if they're not titled. The idea that her children would be viewed as ordinary, despite their lineage, was intolerable. And yet, that very pursuit exposed the contradictions in her entire strategy. You can't reject the throne and still demand its privileges. You can't condemn the monarchy and then insist it recognize your children as part of its legacy. You can't call the system broken and still expect it to validate your status. William, whether intentionally or not, exposed that contradiction with surgical precision. By awarding Prince George a royal knighthood and withholding any such honors from Archie and Lilibet, he didn't just make a decision, he forced a reckoning. Meghan's American royal strategy, built on a delicate balance of defiance and dependency, came crashing down. Because in the eyes of the institution she had left behind, you're either in or you're out. And Meghan was out. Her American royal strategy, at one point hailed as innovative and bold, now appeared fractured and inconsistent. The very tools she used to gain power in the U.S. market became liabilities. The royal name she had hoped to repurpose for her own narrative no longer carried the same weight without the crown's endorsement. And the silence from the palace was deafening. There was no clarification, no sympathy, no backpedaling. William's position stood firm. Titles would be granted to those who served the monarchy, not those who used it for personal branding. This left Meghan in a vulnerable position. If she continued to fight for titles, she would be seen as clinging to the very institution she had walked away from. If she let go, her children's connection to royalty would slowly fade in the public consciousness. Either choice threatened her carefully curated identity as both insider and outsider, a balance she had worked years to maintain. Even supporters began questioning the future. Could Meghan remain relevant without the royal context? Could she build a new chapter entirely independent of Buckingham Palace? Or had the window closed? To some, the answer was already clear. The George announcement had shifted the balance of power once and for all. It marked the moment when William took control of the royal narrative and severed the last thread tying Meghan's American strategy to the monarchy's future. Meghan's attempt to build a brand on both royalty and rebellion had reached its limit. The two could not coexist, and when forced to choose, the institution chose royalty. Meghan was left with rebellion, but rebellion, without a crown to oppose, loses its thunder. From the moment Prince George of Wales entered the world on July 22, 2013, he was destined for a life of unimaginable pressure. The cameras flashed the moment he was cradled in his mother's arms on the steps of the Lindo wing. His birth was not just a family celebration but a constitutional milestone, the confirmation of the monarchy's future, a direct line from Queen Elizabeth to Prince Charles, then to Prince William, and now to George. But despite the pomp surrounding his arrival, his parents made one thing clear: George would grow up differently. For William and Catherine, parenting was never about royal vanity. It was about responsibility. And from his earliest years, George was raised with one foot in tradition and the other firmly in modernity. He was not taught to see himself as a prince by title alone, but as a servant in training, someone whose purpose would be measured not by ceremony but by commitment. This conscious approach to parenting has made George the center of a new vision for the monarchy, a monarchy that works, evolves, and earns its place. And with the conferral of his recent royal title, George has become more than just a boy born into privilege. He has become the embodiment of what the crown intends to be. The decision to grant George the Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order was not made lightly. This isn't a decoration handed out like a school ribbon. It is a personal honor bestowed by the monarch himself, typically given in recognition of personal service to the sovereign or the royal family. For George to receive such a distinction at such a young age sent a message across the world. He is not just the future king in name. He is now officially being recognized as a key pillar of the monarchy's next chapter. This move was deeply symbolic. It emphasized continuity, legacy, and duty. But perhaps most importantly, it reinforced the idea that George is being shaped not for personal privilege but public service. Insiders close to the royal household say that William and Catherine have carefully structured George's upbringing to reflect that ethos. He attends a traditional preparatory school, yes, but his schedule is designed to include exposure to both royal life and normal childhood experiences. He participates in carefully selected public appearances, learns diplomatic basics, and is introduced to constitutional knowledge far earlier than most children. He is being trained, slowly but deliberately, for kingship. Yet he's also expected to do his own homework, participate in sports, and build friendships without royal interference. The goal is clear: to produce a monarch who is grounded, informed, and above all, prepared. One longtime palace staffer who has observed George since his toddler years described him this way: he's serious when he needs to be, and silly when he can be. But he knows, he really knows, that he's being prepared for something big. You can see it in how he carries himself. That balance between innocence and responsibility is what makes George so essential to the monarchy's public image. He is young enough to symbolize a new beginning, yet already carries the legacy of centuries past. And his every move, every smile, every outfit even, is dissected by the press and royal watchers as a glimpse into what the monarchy will become under his future reign. This visibility, while powerful, also presents a risk. The royal family has long understood that young heirs can be either assets or vulnerabilities. Too much exposure too soon, and the public may grow weary. Too little, and the connection may weaken. With George, the palace appears to have struck a careful balance, showing just enough to keep the public invested without overwhelming him with responsibility too early. The stakes are high. In a world increasingly skeptical of hereditary privilege, George's development may determine whether the monarchy retains its moral license to exist. For William and Catherine, this reality is not lost. They know that George cannot simply inherit the throne, he must justify it. This is why the contrast between George and his cousins across the Atlantic has become so pronounced. While George is introduced to public service, Archie and Lilibet are raised far from royal protocol. While George is trained in the delicate art of diplomacy, his cousins are reportedly shielded from the monarchy's influence altogether. The divergence is stark and deliberate. William's choice to grant George a title and deny the same to Archie and Lilibet is not just an act of exclusion. It's a declaration of principle. In William's world, royalty is not about ancestry. It's about accountability. And George, by virtue of his upbringing and proximity to duty, fits that mold. Observers point out that even at school, George is aware of his future role. He's taught about the monarchy, British history, and the expectations that come with being third in line. Classmates reportedly treat him with respect, but not deference, exactly what William and Catherine want. They have shielded him from the burdens of celebrity while ensuring he understands the gravity of his future. One teacher reportedly said, he doesn't act entitled. He asks questions, he listens, and he's very protective of his siblings. There's a kindness to him that you can tell is being encouraged at home. That environment is no accident. It's the product of a carefully curated upbringing, one that reflects William's broader strategy for the monarchy. George is not just a prince. He is a prototype. And that prototype has already begun influencing the monarchy's internal decisions. The focus on leaner royal duties, the emphasis on duty over privilege, the doctrine of earned titles, all of it aligns with how George is being raised. In many ways, the monarchy is already being shaped around him. It's a strategy that has drawn praise from unexpected places. Even some of the monarchy's critics acknowledge that George's upbringing seems far more grounded than what previous royal heirs experienced. Gone are the days of aloof aristocrats with no connection to the people. George is being raised to be both a symbol and a citizen. But with that strategy comes inevitable pressure. What happens if George fails to live up to these expectations? What happens if, as a teenager or young adult, he resists the life being mapped out for him? The palace insists there is room for flexibility, that George will have choices. But deep down, Everyone understands the truth. His path is set. The burden of monarchy is one few would choose voluntarily. And yet, he must carry it. William and Catherine are reportedly doing everything in their power to mitigate that pressure. They maintain a relatively private home life, limit his media exposure, and give him space to grow into his role naturally. But the institution is watching. So is the world. Every step George takes is not just a personal milestone. It's a signal of where the monarchy is heading. That is why his title matters. Not because it adds letters to his name, but because it confirms what has already been set in motion. George is being prepared for a throne not as an accident of birth, but as a position of earned trust. This makes him the most consequential royal child in a generation. Unlike his father and grandfather, who grew up in more rigid royal systems, George is being molded in a post-Diana, post-Sussex era, one that demands transparency, empathy, and purpose. And unlike his cousins, who are being raised under an entirely different system in another country, George will grow into his role under the watchful eye of the British public. His actions, values, and choices will shape how future generations view the monarchy itself. In that context, William's decision to elevate George now was not premature. It was strategic. It was a reminder that the monarchy is not sleeping, that it is adapting, that it has a plan. George is that plan. He represents the bridge between the monarchy's troubled past and its uncertain future. He embodies the hope that royalty can remain relevant, not through grandeur, but through grace, not through entitlement, but through engagement. And in a world that increasingly questions inherited power, George must do more than hold the crown. He must earn it. In a family defined by its public image, silence can sometimes be louder than speech. And in the midst of one of the most emotionally charged royal dramas in recent memory, the public honoring of Prince George and the exclusion of Archie and Lilibet, Prince Harry has said nothing. Not a tweet, not a public statement, not even a veiled reference in a podcast, speech, or interview. For a man once known for his candor, for his willingness to break royal protocol and speak from the heart, the absence of commentary has been startling. It's not as though Harry has ever shied away from confrontation. Since stepping away from royal duties, he has gone on the record multiple times, condemning the royal institution's relationship with the British media, criticizing the emotional coldness within the palace, and accusing unnamed family members of racial insensitivity. His interviews with Oprah, Anderson Cooper, and others painted a vivid picture of alienation, trauma, and generational pain. But now, when his own children have been publicly denied what many assumed was their birthright, he has remained completely mute. And the world is asking why. Some believe Harry is wrestling with a conflict that cuts deeper than any he's experienced before, a war between his loyalty to Meghan and his bond with his brother. While the media paints their feud as irreparable, those who've studied the royal brothers closely know that beneath the anger, beneath the years of public separation, there is something deeper: shared history, mutual trauma, and the complicated love born of surviving a mother's death in the public eye. Prince William's decision to confer a title upon his own son, while leaving Harry's children without the same recognition, could easily be seen as a personal blow, a declaration of dynastic distance. And yet, Harry has chosen not to retaliate. Not publicly. Not yet. Sources close to the Sussexes suggest the silence may not be the result of calm resignation, but calculated restraint. According to one insider, Harry has been advised by both his US-based legal team and his media consultants to avoid any direct criticism of William during this period. The reasoning is simple. Attacking his brother on this matter would only deepen the perception that he and Meghan want the benefits of royalty without its responsibilities. But others see something more personal behind Harry's quiet response. One longtime royal aide claims Harry was genuinely surprised by the title announcement. Not because he believed George shouldn't be honored, but because he thought the palace would avoid the move for the sake of diplomacy. He assumed there would be more discretion, the source said, that the palace wouldn't make such a clear comparison between the cousins so publicly. When asked if Harry was angry, the aide replied, he was disappointed. Deeply. But more than that, he was hurt. For Harry, the decision signaled something he had long feared but never fully accepted, that his family had moved on. That his role as the spare was not just a relic of childhood teasing but a permanent reality. Even in fatherhood, he remained an outsider. And yet, despite the emotional undercurrent, Harry has kept his response private. Observers believe he's still trying to find a way to reconcile two fundamentally opposing forces: his belief in Meghan's experience and truth, and his enduring connection to the institution that raised him. This balancing act has defined Harry's public life since the infamous Megxit. On one hand, he has portrayed himself as a devoted husband, willing to walk away from power and tradition to protect his wife and children. On the other, he has never fully severed ties with his royal roots. He attended his grandfather Prince Philip's funeral. He returned again for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. And most notably, he flew to the UK at short notice when the Queen passed away, standing in solemn silence beside his brother and father during her funeral processions. Each of these appearances was marked by tension, awkward glances, and carefully choreographed photo ops. But the fact that he came at all spoke volumes. Harry may have left the institution, but a part of him still feels bound to it. And to them, this complicated emotional state may explain his current silence. He's walking a minefield, one former royal correspondent observed. On one side, he has a wife who feels personally betrayed. On the other, he has a brother he still loves and a father who holds the keys to his children's royal status. One misstep, and everything collapses. There's also the matter of legal and financial entanglements. Despite being cut off from public royal funds, Harry and Meghan still retain Frogmore Cottage as their UK residence. They still depend on royal protocols for security arrangements during UK visits. And Harry, despite his criticisms, still uses the Duke of Sussex title. Engaging in open warfare over George's new title would almost certainly provoke a royal backlash. It might even jeopardize the limited privileges the Sussexes still hold. Which brings us to another theory, one that has begun to gain traction among insiders and analysts alike. Harry's silence isn't regretful. It's strategic. Some believe he is waiting, watching, calculating his next move with the same care the palace once employed to manage his own public image. The idea is simple. Let the narrative evolve, then intervene when the timing is most advantageous. Perhaps through a new book, perhaps through a second Netflix project, or perhaps in the form of a carefully edited public address. What gives this theory weight is Harry's track record. His memoir, Spare, was not an impulsive diary. It was a carefully crafted piece of storytelling, dropped with surgical timing, designed to reclaim the narrative. His interviews were scheduled to coincide with major royal events, ensuring maximum attention and framing. In this light, his current silence could be the prelude to something larger. Already, there are rumors of a follow-up documentary. Insiders claim that conversations are taking place between the Sussexes' production company and several streaming platforms. And while no details have been confirmed, it's believed that the exclusion of Archie and Lilibet from royal honors will be a major storyline. If true, that would be explosive. But even if Harry never speaks publicly about this incident, his silence will remain a symbol, one open to interpretation. Is it dignified restraint? A quiet act of protest? A sign of growing disillusionment? Or something else entirely? Some believe Harry has begun to accept the reality of his new role. Not just as a husband and father living in America, but as a man permanently displaced from the core of the monarchy. That realization, for someone raised in the center of royal life, is not just painful, it's existential. But others insist that Harry's silence is temporary, that the moment his children ask him why they were left out, why their cousin George is a knight, and they are not, the dam will break. When that happens, the world won't hear from Prince Harry, the royal. It will hear from Harry, the father. And that could change everything. The moment Prince George's knighthood was announced and the absence of titles for Archie and Lilibet became clear, a media firestorm ignited that is yet to die down. It wasn't just another royal development. It was a public declaration of hierarchy, loyalty, and power, and it was dissected on television screens, radio stations, newspapers, and digital platforms across the globe. Commentators who had spent decades studying and covering the royal family quickly realized this was no ceremonial title. It was a bombshell, delivered in the form of an honor. And almost instantly, the war of narratives began. Across the UK, conservative commentators largely applauded the decision. For them, Prince William had taken a bold, necessary step to redefine the monarchy in an era of growing skepticism. Richard Palmer, a royal correspondent with deep ties to the palace, wrote that William's move solidified a future of responsibility, not entitlement. Titles should be earned, and Prince George is being raised in the cradle of royal duty. The same cannot be said for Archie and Lilibet. Camilla Tominey of The Telegraph emphasized that this was about values, not vengeance. In a panel discussion, she stated bluntly, Prince George is growing up in the system. He's not being raised on the beaches of Santa Barbara. He's learning how to become a monarch. This knighthood is not a favor, it's a responsibility. But while UK-based royalists largely defended the palace's move, the reaction across the Atlantic was far more divided and, at times, furious. American media outlets, particularly those sympathetic to the Sussexes, framed the announcement as a calculated slight. The View aired a special segment discussing the implications. Sunny Hostin claimed it was further evidence that Meghan and her children were never truly welcome. Joy Behar questioned the timing, suggesting it was meant to provoke. The phrase, "they're sending a message," was repeated like a mantra. On CNN, Don Lemon described the development as cold and deliberate, suggesting that William had weaponized formality in order to draw a line between his legacy and his BR. Social media platforms became battlegrounds of conflicting opinions. On Twitter and TikTok, hashtags like #JusticeForArchie and #PrinceGeorge trended simultaneously. Users debated royal traditions, colonial legacies, racial implications, and family dynamics with ferocity. Influencers aligned with social justice causes accused the monarchy of exclusionary practices and racial bias. Others defended William as the future monarch doing what's necessary to preserve the institution's integrity. Even prominent U.S. media personalities like Oprah Winfrey, who had once given Meghan and Harry their most iconic interview, was reportedly surprised by the swiftness of the backlash. Behind the scenes, sources say she has privately encouraged Meghan to remain measured in any public reaction, aware of how quickly sympathy can shift in the court of public opinion. Meanwhile, British tabloids pounced on the moment with the kind of ferocity only they can deliver. The Daily Mail ran front-page spreads contrasting images of George in royal garb next to shots of Meghan and Harry walking in Los Angeles. The message was unmistakable. One side was loyal, the other was lost. The Sun headlined its coverage with "Crown and Country: Why George Deserves What Meghan's Kids Never Will." Then came the royal experts. Tom Bower, a biographer critical of the Sussexes, described William's action as a strategic masterstroke. During a televised debate, he said, "The monarchy doesn't owe Meghan or Harry anything. They made their choice. They walked away. Now they're facing the consequences of that decision. You cannot monetize royalty on Netflix and then expect the palace to treat you like you never left." But not all experts shared Bower's hardline stance. Valentine Lowe, author of Courtiers, took a more nuanced approach. The exclusion of Archie and Lilibet is not just a family issue, it's a constitutional one. William is drawing new lines. Yes, but at what cost? There's a growing divide, and the royal family must ask themselves how sustainable this divide really is. In a surprising turn, Omid Scobie, long regarded as one of Meghan's closest defenders in the media, took to X, formerly Twitter, to voice his frustrations. "Titles were never meant to be tools of punishment," he wrote. "To bestow one on a future king while freezing out his cousins sends a very deliberate signal, and one that carries the risk of permanently damaging what little remains of this fractured family." Scobie later elaborated in an op-ed, questioning the palace's long-term strategy. The monarchy must ask itself whether protecting tradition is worth alienating the next generation. In the age of global audiences and shifting values, exclusion may no longer be the strength it once was. The article triggered backlash of its own, with British outlets accusing Scobie of fueling division. Yet it also resonated with many readers who felt the royal family was struggling to reconcile its ancient rules with modern expectations. American outlets continued to pick up on this tension. The New York Times ran a Sunday feature with the headline, "A Title, a Future, and a Divide, Inside the Royal Rift." The article analyzed the symbolic weight of William's decision and how it was perceived not just as an administrative matter, but a cultural rejection of an American biracial family within an ancient British institution. Late-night shows didn't hold back either. Trevor Noah joked that William's actions were basically the royal version of unfollowing someone on Instagram. Stephen Colbert quipped, "If you want to send a message with titles, why not just name George King of Shade and be done with it?" But while satire and analysis dominated airwaves, the royal family itself remained characteristically silent. No press conferences, no rebuttals, no explanations. This silence only added to the drama. Commentators speculated that the palace's refusal to clarify or justify the decision was a power move in itself. Royal protocol dictates that once a message is sent, be it a title, an omission, or a carefully choreographed photo op, it is rarely walked back. To speak about it would imply doubt. The palace, always valuing stability over spontaneity, preferred to let the message stand alone. And so, the silence became part of the message. It created a media vacuum, one filled by pundits, psychologists, political scientists, and even historians. BBC Radio 4 hosted a panel titled Inheritance or Inclusion, which examined the evolution of royal titles and how their meaning has shifted over time. Panelists debated whether the monarchy should modernize the very concept of titles or maintain the tradition as a safeguard of order. At the heart of every debate, however, was the same fundamental question: should Archie and Lilibet have received titles? And it was a question with no consensus. To supporters of William, the answer